Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to this second photography tutorial. In the first episode we were explaining how photography is basically controlling light to record an image on the digital sensor, and there we were looking at shutter speed. In this episode we're going to take a look at aperture. One of the best ways to understand aperture is to think about the pupil of your eye. If you're outside in bright sunlight, the pupil of your eye closes down smaller to allow less light through so you can see. In low light the pupil opens up wider, which allows more light through again so you can see clearly. Within the lens of your camera you've got a very similar system. It's made up of metal leaves that open and close to make a larger or smaller hole, or aperture. Now aperture is normally measured in what's called f numbers or f-stops. Typical values of these are 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11 and so on and so on. These numbers refer to the focal length or distance of the aperture, not the size of the hole. So the numbers are the opposite way round. An aperture of f16 is a very small hole. An aperture of f2.8 is a much larger aperture hole. This goes down to what's called depth of field, but we'll look at that in more detail in another episode. For now, let's have a look at the aperture in a real lens, and hopefully that'll explain things a bit more clearly. Okay, so here we have a lens off of the camera, and this is open at its widest aperture, which on this lens is 2.8. As you can see, it's a nice big aperture hole to allow the light through. So I start to scroll down the f numbers, you'll see the hole start to get smaller. So that's 2.8, that's f4, that's 5.6, that's f8, that's f11, that's f16, and on this lens the smallest aperture is f22. So let's open it up again. That's the smallest aperture, f22, nice small aperture hole. Wider aperture, 2.8, nice wide aperture hole. That's because the numbers relate to the focal distance, not the size of the hole. So 2.8, 22, 2.8. Okay, so now we've seen how the aperture works in a real lens. Why would you bother changing your aperture on your camera? Again, there's two reasons. There's a practical reason and an artistic reason. The practical reason is it's giving you another level of control over how much light reaches the sensor to record an image. In bright sunlight, it's going to take less light to record the image, so a smaller aperture, f16, allows less light through to record on the sensor. In low light, it's going to take more light to record the image, so a wider aperture, 2.8, is allowing more light through to record onto the sensor. From an artistic point of view, aperture controls what's called your depth of field. Now, to explain this very basically, if you're using a wide aperture and you focused on my face, the background would be out of focus. If you're using a smaller aperture and focused on my face, the background would remain sharp. But again, we'll look at depth of field in more detail in another episode. For now, hopefully that's explained aperture. I'm Dave Vickers. Thanks for watching. See you next time.